Hello, and welcome back to the GreenStaxx podcast, Thinking Inside the Box. I'm Julia Hansen, your host, and I'm the Director of Business Development and Partnerships at GreenStaxx. Our aim for this mini-series of Thinking Inside the Box is to host conversations to explore how standardized design can be a solution to advancing the modular construction industry, and thereby tackle the affordable housing crisis and also create healthier, more sustainable buildings. So I'm here in our second episode with GreenStaxx's Director of Product Development, Hans Hawrysz. Hi, Hans, and welcome.
Hi, Julia. Good to see you today.
Good to see you. Hans has a long history in his career of working in product development and marketing and business strategy, which he's done for several Fortune 500 companies, as well as leadership positions in several technological startups. And Hans, you've worked with the founders of GreenStaxx for quite a number of years, isn't that right?
Yeah, yep, I have. Yep.
Great. Well, Hans is one of our deepest thinkers on the team about the benefits and requirements of using standardized design in the modular context. And so today we're going to be talking about how standardization generally applies to the modular construction industry, and hear from Hans where GreenStaxx is going and where the industry can go in order to become more efficient. Why don't we just get right into it?
Okay.
When we talk about standardization, Hans, in the modular construction context or in the construction industry generally, what are we really talking about? If you can lay that
Okay.
out for us.
Sure. Well, I think the place to start is what you started with is that a major national concern is that we're in a multifamily housing crisis. Can't produce enough housing fast enough, cheap enough, and with the level of quality that we want. And more importantly, it also needs to now be at high performance. The estimates are that we need to create about 5 million new housing units to meet demand. So to start how standardization fits in is that we here believe that it's about the principles of mass production is the key part of the solution. We think adopting these principles is really part of what we need to do. And the starting point is that mass production is based on standardized components, organized process and assembly lines, and specialized teams. And I think the other really important is replication, doing the same thing over and over, which moves people up the experience curve and the economies of scale. The results are higher throughput, higher consistency, and quality, and reduced cost. Now, in our world, a relevant point in the construction world is that standardization is based on the standardization of dimensions and, in terms of height, width, and length. And there's some really interesting examples. Probably one of the greatest inventions ever made was the invention of the shipping container by Malcolm McLean in 1954. He standardized around a 35 by 811 container, and this revolutionized the world and is now a $14 trillion industry. Another interesting example of the housing industry is back at the end of World War II is Levittown, which was a developer who created thousands and thousands of houses based on a 60 by 72 grid, and was able to ship components to sites, and it built thousands of houses, but it was based on a standardized dimension. And of course, one that's relevant in our industry is the mobile home, which again, after the end of World War II, was organized around a 60 by 72 to 12 to 16 feet wide So all of these are examples of standardization of dimensions that really led to significant improvements in quality and speed. The other important part about all of these is the ability to ship across the road. All of these were based on dimensions that allowed shipping of components across the road, which is what the modular industry is based on. And in fact, the mobile home is the progenitor of what we would like to call the evolving modern multifamily industry. And if we kind of take a quick look at the industry, we can see that the principles of mass production are now being adopted worldwide. And in fact, in Europe, modular multifamily represents about 45% of all the new buildings going up in Europe. And the US, we're at about 5 to 6%. And there's lots of reasons why that is, and we could talk about that in some other session. I think another important thing is that historically modular has been thought of as being kind of not very attractive and very utilitarian. But now, to dispel this, there's new modular multifamily buildings are now winning awards for design and appeal around the world. So the idea that modular doesn't look good, I think, has been dispelled. So I guess the other question is, how does GSX fit into this picture? And I think the starting point, Julia, is that, we would like to believe that, GSX is a leader in really in modular design, multifamily modular design and production. And the important part is how we've applied standardization is we've organized, our units around 13 by 62 by 11 blocks. And these blocks can be laid side by side or stacked up to create buildings of various sizes and shapes. And the other important part is that each of these blocks, which then turns into apartments and units, are pre-designed and pre-engineered. So all of the design elements are completed, all of the engineering is completed, and each unit also comes with a complete outline spec. And what that means is that, the flooring, the appliances, everything that goes into that unit is completely defined. And the other point is that these units are basically ready to go. So basically they are on the shelf and ready to go and can be deployed on a site. The other interesting thing is that we have also now created a product, which is the triple decker, which is based on a 13 by 54 by 11 grid. And it's obviously a 3-story building and is ideally suited for urban infill and for basically apartment units, townhomes. So this combination, we think, can really fit the needs of the market today. And we think that our innovation of standardized modular units combined with organized design and production processes can really provide developers with ready-to-go buildings with increased speed, quality, and cost. But more importantly, I want to come back to the principle of replication, that we think that replication is really at the heart of gaining the benefits of standardization. In fact, there have been many industrial studies that have demonstrated that with replication and going up the experience curve, you can reduce costs by 50%. So we think that the principles of mass production, standardization, and replication are a critical answer potentially to the challenges of affordable housing. So, and that's the story.
Very well put, Hans. Yeah, that's so much in a nutshell about GreenStaxx's stance on how we can insert methods of standardization into the multifamily housing process. I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier as sort of a key, maybe more of like a human aspect of industrialized construction and standardization. You mentioned the learning curve of learning how to do each part of the process more efficiently and to higher standards or higher quality as a key piece of the industrialization of construction. Can you tell me a little bit more about how the learning curve for discrete parts of the process comes into play when it comes to using standardized designs in modular building?
Okay, I think there are basically 3 components of a replication. One is obviously the replication of plans. Right, we spend a lot of time and energy creating plans, and one of the issues in the industry is that basically is actually very little replication. Typically, the industry is based about starting all over. So one of the barriers has been the business model construction in the design and construction industry. So the first element is the reuse of plans. The second element is then when you get to the modular component is to ensure that the specifications for modular, and one of the issues, we've talked about is what makes modular very different than any other method of construction is that everything has to be identified up front. You're building a product, so you can't kind of go along, make decisions as you go. It has to be defined up front. So the second part of it is to get to the modular piece is making sure that the modular manufacturer replicates the same plans time and time again. I mean, if we think about the difficulty of shop drawings. Well, if you can reuse shop drawings, that significantly can speed up the process. Third element is really about when the modules appear on site, is really in what people typically call the button-up process. Is how do you then ensure that every time you do it, you're doing it the same way? So the important part of that is also around the idea of teams, specialized teams. If we go back to what mass production is, it's really more of an assembly line process. So the implication of it is you link together the design element, the modular element, and the construction element into a continuous process. And you can imagine if you do the same thing over and over, you're going to have consistent quality, significant improvements in speed. And as we know, industry has proven that you can reduce costs significantly.
Yeah. And the next conversations that we have on this mini-series will be with our project architect for two of our triple-decker projects. So we'll be doing a deep dive into the savings on the design side when we get to that conversation in a few weeks. So Hans, it's clear that standardized design is a really important lever that can be pulled when doing modular construction in particular. When I've been to conferences, and I'm assuming the same for you. For example, we go to the World of Modular conference every year, and that's really a convention for a lot of modular manufacturers to come together and share what's working with them. We hear so much about their ability to customize design and create these bespoke projects. But we don't hear too much about either their need or their desire to use standardized designs. Why do you think that?
Well, I think it goes back to the discussion we had about the industry business model. The industry business model is based on the idea that, every project is going to be unique, and you assemble a unique group of players to build a building. And the problem is that since you're organized around bespoke buildings, it's pretty hard to replicate. You come back to the barriers to replication, the barriers to the experience curve. It's really a fundamental issue in how the industry is organized. If you think about it, if you're in the engineering or architecture world or whatever, the way you get paid is you create a project every time. If you're replicating plans over and over, it obviously begins to threaten the existing business model. So that is probably, if you come back to the barriers to moving up the experience curve, the barriers to economies of scale, a fundamental issue is the way the industry is organized. And I think the issue there is to find developers who really understand the idea of the savings and the benefits that are incumbent in the replication, the standardization and replication process.
So you really see it as a developer-driven approach to modular manufacturers offering their services?
Yes, because it's only the developer who can then organize the process. Again, developers that are in the process of doing multiple projects. I think that if we go back to the idea of affordable housing, one of the issues is if you actually look at where the construction industry has been for the last couple of years, is that it's been very much focused on high end. You're building Mercedes. In order to satisfy the needs of affordable housing, the industry needs to be thinking about producing Chevys and, kind of mass market kinds of products. So it's really the developers who need to organize the process because they're the ones that basically dictate how it works. I think one of the things we're also beginning to see is more vertical integration, where, which again, in industry history, vertical integration has been one way that people have achieved the benefits of replication and economies of scale.
Right. And we hear that analogy so often to the automotive industry with Henry Ford creating the assembly line and building so many Model Ts that you can have any color you want as long as it's black.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a little
right.
bit more customization you can do with a modular housing product.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the way we look at it is, what's standardized is the dimensions of the units, the mechanical systems, the window openings, et cetera. What's customizable, of course, is you can put in, various appliances and cabinets as long as they're the right size. Of course, you can put in whatever kind of flooring you want. So you can really customize appearance to a very high degree. You can't customize the fundamental dimensions, back to the importance of standardized dimensions. You can't really customize the dimensions of the units very easily.
You mentioned the dimensions of the shipping container, and they're actually quite similar to the dimensions that modular housing uses, or at least what the GreenStaxx unit designs put forward. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of transportability, or the connection between the shipping container size and how we've established the right dimensions for a modular housing box?
Yeah. That's a great point. Because if you come back to the other key principle of the modular industry is really about offsite construction. The ability to build in factories, build components, use the assembly line process in a factory implies that you need to be able to move those products to a construction site. So the ability, leverage the power of in the factory, but then you've got to get those units to the site, and the ability then to have this, standardized dimensions. And in fact, GreenStaxx units are basically optimized for two things. One is the assembly line in the factory, and then secondly, the ability to, move those units over the road. So back to good point you're making is that in our world, whether it's the shipping container, the Levittown homes, or the mobile homes, the key ingredient is that all of these have to be able to be moved efficiently over the road to get to a site. So all of our units are optimized for both modular construction and for the ability to move them efficiently.
And I guess there aren't that many different dimensions that work both for optimizing the factory capabilities as well as for fitting down our standardized road widths across the country. Well, Hans, how did you develop this interest in standardization and modular housing on a personal level? I'm curious to know.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have always had an interest in housing and basically driven by the fact that I moved around a lot and have built houses and have, renovated buildings multiple times. And I find the ability to kind of craft your surroundings to fit your personal needs is something I've always been interested in. And I happened to meet Art and Gwen a number of years ago in Cambridge, and they explained the concept to me. And the other thing is, I would say, in a significant part of my career, I've always been interested in kind of what's new, what's different, and kind of where's the world of new products going. And this issue of affordable housing, and to me, has always been a critical question. So I guess the combination of my interest in housing and the promise of basically industrialized production to solve the housing crisis has been something that's, for a number of years, has always interested me and attracted me to the GreenStaxx.
Great. Well, if you had any guess or any maybe sort of specific suggestion for where the construction industry could go within the next, let's say, year to 2 years, what would you think, or what would you suggest as a concrete next step for the industry?
Well, I think the important part, and this is a combination in my mind of governmental pressure, I guess, top down and bottom up economics, is that for more developers to recognize that the market is really now in this kind of mass production affordable housing. If you look at all the housing statistics, let's call it the luxury market is pretty well tapped out. The demand for Class A housing is, starting to decline. And there's a huge unmet need. And the market, we would like to believe, always goes after unmet needs. So I think the combination of governmental pressure, tax incentives, and there are now many developers starting to recognize that that's kind of where the world's going.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Hans. I really appreciate you coming onto the podcast to give us an overview of what standardization means in the context of modular construction and how GreenStaxx is approaching it. Up next, we're going to be speaking with Gwen Noyes, one of the GreenStaxx designers and the author behind our Passive House triple-decker design. And that does it for our podcast today. Thank you for listening to Thinking Inside the Box. Please remember to like and subscribe, or put any questions into the comments. The future's modular.